So, Crucible of Eternity, the penultimate dungeon. Doesn't time fly? Well, for this one, we're going to be running a build you saw a little glimpse of in the previous part, as another member of my party was playing. That's an engineer, but no, not a damagey engineer, and no, not a kind of useless turret-based engineer. Today, we're going to be playing a support engineer. This is a build I really enjoy, and a lot of people mistakenly believe only works with access to some upcoming elite specializations associated with the expansions. It's actually very strong. So, the idea is we're going to be using the med kit, which was reworked sometime 2018 or 17 to have 5 totally new skills that are extremely powerful to heal our allies. Bract is actually wearing the same gear we saw he slipped into very briefly for the story mode Crucible of Eternity. It's healing power armor with the addition of some new runes, flock runes. Now, these give lots of healing and also mean that whenever we swap into the medkit, mostly, we also splash an extra little heal out around us. As well as this, I've also skinned it differently. We're actually in the Hall of Monuments stuff. This is the Hall of Monuments medium set, and even the Hall of Monuments rifle that you get. It's kind of cool to see an Asura wearing this stuff. So, yes, the build here, as we look through our specializations, I'm picking up Alchemy to support people, and what's really crucial here is increased healing on the medkit and the Grandmaster Purity of Purpose. Whenever we cleanse someone, it instead turns it into a boon. So, if we're in the medkit and we use our skill 3, the cleansing field, allies in this will have their conditions turned into boons. If we get chilled, that means we're giving people alacrity. An engineer is actually really good for offering that these days, and it's not a profession most people really associate with that boon. So, yes, we've got Alchemy. Next, we have Inventions for this powerful Grandmaster. Whenever we heal ourselves, half of it goes to the people around us. So I can use, say, my bandage ability to heal myself a lot, and everyone near me will also gain the benefits. Also, there are some other useful things here. This middle trait you can obviously swap to something else you like if you're not using traits, as I'm not here. Say Soothing Detonation. And then finally, I'm picking up the tools line, which gives us extra effects when we go into a kit, such as being able to reflect when we go into our med kit, access to swiftness, and also we get benefits while swapping to our elixir gun and our mortar kit. And down here, I'm picking up Gadgeteer. One particularly fun thing about the tools line is taking this, the reactive lenses. This means that when we get disabled, we instantly stun break, give ourselves might and fury. And when running that on a rifle build, it means if I use my rifle 4, that usually should knock us back, we instantly stand back up. The animation plays of us falling over and stuff, but it doesn't actually affect our skills. So this basically becomes an ability that gives us fury and might. Kind of fun and excellent for taking out break bars. Doing pistol shield is obviously totally viable. If you look at my utility skills, you have a lot of options here. I'm going with a lot of break bar damage using the personal battering ram, and I'm going for Elixir S to stealth on the odd occasion, but basically you can run what you like in these 2 slots, in my opinion. I like to make my builds quite CC heavy, and indeed this one definitely is, with the rifle, with access to the personal battering ram, but it's really your choice what you find fun. A definite strong option is to go with the Thumper turret and trait for turrets, so that this is even more break bar damage and a bit of extra protection for your team. Really nice stuff. I recommend you guys try it out, and well, you'll see from the footage just how effective it is at healing and keeping us alive. With all that said, let's move over to Lion's Arch. In terms of dialogue, layers of depth, and thought put into it, the Crucible of Eternity is an extremely strong contender for best dungeon in the game. It's leagues and leagues ahead of what we just played, The Honor of the Waves, and as this video goes along, you'll see why. But even before we get into the dungeon, I feel it's important to point out some important trivia about this place that makes it somewhat more prominent than many of the other dungeon locations around Tyria. It's the fact that before the game came out, while the devs were releasing novels around the setting of Guild Wars 2, the third of the 3 novels was originally pegged to be called The Crucible of Eternity, written by a man named Stephen Seville. The original release date would have had it in July 2012, right before launch. However, before the novel had a chance to release, the project was scrapped and replaced with a different book, The Sea of Sorrows, written by one of the chief lore heads and world builders at ArenaNet, Rhys Soesby. Sea of Sorrows didn't release until well after launch, when most players had already had their hands on the MMO. It's a good book, but set about 100 years before the Inquest would have built the Crucible, featuring completely different characters, and has nothing to do with the subject material Stephen would have been writing about. Several months after all this transpired, the player base did ask Stephen directly what he knew of all of this, and got a quote. It's kind of hard to find now, as the original page it was hosted on 404's, but can be seen on a few WordPress sites I'm very thankful for. The quote is, "I was indeed contacted about 3 years ago now by Will McDermott at ArenaNet to write the third Guild Wars novel. It was meant to be called The Crucible of Eternity, but about 10 months ago, ArenaNet decided they wanted to go a different direction and instead wanted a zombies and pirates novel." So from the timescales here, you'll see that the idea of a novel based in this dungeon location preceded the launch of the game by about 3 years when they were sending feelers out. Why is that? What's the Crucible of Eternity got that's so important and so defining for the franchise going forwards? We've seen how, for the personal story, Kudu becomes something of a major antagonist, sure, tied a little bit more to the Asura, and I think we can all accurately guess he would have featured in this novel. Maybe we would have got more information about the Inquest itself. I don't think it's too far-fetched to suggest this might have been something of a soft sequel to Edge of Destiny, which really didn't have much of a conclusion. But why this dungeon? There's Zodge's dialogue in story mode, linking it to the Thormanova reactor disaster, so maybe that would have featured as the climax of this novel. But what I think you guys will find is that this novel was going to reveal a very big mystery the core game was setting up, and it's fixed here, mostly, at Crucible of Eternity. It's a facility devoted to tampering with Elder Dragon magics. Outside the facility, we already had the hint as to Deep Sea Dragon minions, one of the most mysterious Elder Dragons. There's the curious Zone Green above. And inside Explorable now, for those players that looked very closely, you can find one of the biggest hints as to upcoming expansion stories in the entire game. When we get to that moment in one of the paths very shortly, I want you guys to think back to this novel, how it had been planned out 3 years in advance of launch Guild Wars 2, how its original release window was set to supplement launch, coming out just 1 month before the MMO, how it was mysteriously cancelled and swapped for something else, and how the entire substance of the big story this novel was set to deliver has probably been distilled down into one enormous hint hiding in Crucible of Eternity Explorable mode. The dungeon is, by the way, still of a supreme quality without considering any of that extra stuff I just mentioned, just because of the pure quantity of dialogue, voiced and written, and many of the other details we'll see in a second. Weirdly, asking the dungeon historian about it, it appears at the bottom of the list, below Ara. I don't know why. He says the Crucible of Eternity is the Inquest's most infamous lab, located near Mount Maelstrom. It's host to nefarious researchers conducting forbidden, dangerous experiments. The word forbidden there, I think, being quite justified, considering the monstrous abomination we saw they'd brewed, a blending of multiple Elder Dragon minions as the final boss of story mode we dispatched after taking out Kudu himself. Once again, this is a dungeon with a meta event locking it off, but this meta is very slow to reset, so often it's open, and even when it's not, if you play Path of Fire, the latest expansion, and have mounts, you can kind of skip in anyway. Similar to COF, we have an NPC outside the dungeon that describes things going on inside that don't really happen at all. You're probably wondering, who is Vixis? Are they Inquest? Are they regular Asura? Member of the Pact? They certainly don't look to be. And why they're helping us go back into a dungeon that last we saw, in the final moments of story, was about to explode as the reactor was going haywire. They say careful there. Kudu may be no more, but the Crucible of Eternity is more dangerous than ever. We say, what is the Crucible of Eternity? It is the Inquest's most dangerous laboratory. With Kudu dead, the entire complex has gone haywire. Haywire isn't exactly the way I would describe about to explode, but hey. We say, what do you mean more dangerous than ever? They say the systems are breaking down inside. We have to recover lost data before the entire complex goes. It's this mention of recovering lost data that isn't really true. We won't be doing that. What needs to be done? Gather 5 turtle adventurers and enter together. I'm sure there's something you can do to help. The Crucible of Eternity has become unstable. Assist an Order of Whispers agent in locking down the site. Now that description is more appropriate. Here you'll notice we enter the Asura Gate that we've used for story mode, but instead of appearing at the top of the dungeon where we did before, we're just magically transported to the bottom of the dungeon with no exit gate in sight. I think the initial idea of this dungeon was that we would be traveling down it in story mode and escaping from it in explorable. But they never found a convincing way to get the players from point A to B to C, with also the opportunity of exploring the open world and rest of the personal story in the meantime. So the whole thing got a bit confused, and there's weird stray dialogue left up top with Vixis. Here you saw I was looking through my inventory at the food we're using. First are rice balls for healing, but second, I'm actually using a superior potion of undead slaying, not inquest slaying. And I'll show you why very soon. Agent Spire is our main NPC this time, just the one. And you'll see here, her opening dialogue is hugely complicated with multiple branches. One of the most layered NPCs for written dialogue in all of Guild Wars 2, expansions included. Seriously. Starting from the top, she says, "Ready to watch me push a button? Or do you have any questions?" So we say, "Wait, what's happening?" I think an appropriate response, we've just been thrown into this. She says, "Okay, I'll brief you. We head to this lab's main control panel, input a special lockdown code, and then turn around and leave. Simple. Too simple, actually." We say, "Okay, we're locking it down. If you lock it down, how are we going to get out?" "Well, I'll initiate lockdown at the main panel, and then we take the nearby gate out of here." Boring, if you ask me, but we can't choose all of our assignments, can we? We say, "All right, that does sound very simple. Surely it won't be so easy. I have some more questions." The curious type. Go ahead, but make it quick. I'd rather create answers than slog through questions if you get my drift. We say, "Who are you?" She says, "Call me Spire, pact member and general shooter of problems." "Well, why are you here?" "A minor cleanup operation, very minor. I'm about to lock down this whole facility once and for all. None of Kudu's experiments will ever get out of here." We say, "What kind of experiments?" "The kind you do when you don't have to worry about morality or a body count." This is the inquest defined, right? "Once we shut this place down, Kudu's nightmare factory will be locked away forever." We say, "What do you mean by lucky fools?" And that doesn't really follow, right? You'll see that the dialogue broke a bit here. And if we go back to the earlier question of instead saying, "What is this place?" she'll say, "An inquest high-value target named Kudu ran this lab, conducting all sorts of experiments. Some heroes recently came through and neutralized him and his operation. Lucky fools." And we can say, "I know, I was one of them." She's calling us a fool. She says, "Good work, even if you stepped on a pending operation that was weeks in the making." To be clear, I'm not angry, just envious. Envious? I trained for weeks to infiltrate and assassinate Kudu. I learned every corridor of this place, every possible threat, but someone else got to have all the fun. We say, "Fun? That's an interesting way to put it." And by the way, I seem to remember us coming here with the pact. She says, "Infiltrating an inquest base, sneaking past security, and then isolating and neutralizing the inquest leader? Nor talk about the thrill of the hunt. I suppose that's it for me." Interesting to have Kudu described as the de facto leader there. Not necessarily true, particularly with his passing. So we could say, "Let's shut this place down," and you see how the lucky fool dialogue integrates. A little bit awkwardly done, but there's so much stuff you can ask Spire, I guess it makes sense. Returning to the original lucky fool's question, she can say, "I was part of an operation slated to infiltrate the site and neutralize Kudu, weeks in the planning, and someone beat us to the punch. This right here? You're looking at envy." And we say, "Envious." You'll see it's a slightly different version of what we already read. She says, "I trained for weeks, blah, blah, blah." We say, "Why go after Kudu?" She says, "Professionally, the inquest operation would have unleashed a draconic abominations on Tyria. Killing Kudu would stall such a project." We say, "Professionally, yes, but what did you mean by fun?" And she says, "The thrill of the Norn," dialogue once again. So you see how weirdly things tie together. Some dev put a lot of effort in. Our last option is to say pushing a button. Not exactly controlling the uncontrollable, is it? We get this because Bract is in the Whispers. She says, "Good to see another Order member here. Between you and me, your friends here are worried about nothing." And we say, "But what if your superiors are right? What if this place is unstable?" She says, "Then have a little fun and improvise. My favorite adventures as an agent happen when things don't go according to plan." You may notice she's espousing the developers' philosophies for what's best about dungeon combat there, as articulated by them pre-launch. Nice little touch. We can say, "Sounds like you want something to go wrong. It'll make this mission more interesting. I was this close to a much larger operation. Now, I'm just flipping a switch." You'll notice her personality changes a lot when we go into the Order of Whispers dialogue instead. We say, "As one Order of Whispers member to another, how do you like working for the Pact?" She says, before I only reported to my Lightbringer. Now, it's after action reports, memos, and waiting for permission. And that waiting killed my last mission. We could say, well, it sounds like a grind. She says, tell me about it. Thanks to all the paperwork, a group of heroes broke into the facility and bagged Cootie before I did. Again, I will restate that meta up there is done with the pact. We say, yeah, that was me, and she rotates back into the earlier dialogue. So, just a massive number of things coming from Spire there, and there's a whole bunch more of that to come.
Who are... Oh, great. The pact sent bodyguards. I already told them it's as simple as pushing a button.
Not anymore. Something has gone wrong with the security system. Your superiors sent us to protect you.
Charming. If you can keep up, you're welcome to come along. But nothing's stopping this place from getting locked down. A few minutes worth of work, and we'll be laughing about this over drinks in Lion's Arch.
So, now Brack seems to think we've been sent because stuff's gone wrong, not data retrieval.
Alright, let's go. The sooner we lock this place down, the better.
Objective 1 is to escort Agent Spire to the mainframe, and you'll notice we have not participated in voting yet. That actually happens a short distance into the dungeon, and I'll be sure to show you guys that soon. It means that this corridor, despite the fact I'm going to be playing multiple times here to record the video, you guys will only see the once. We have to take out these Ice Brood, not Inquest, and that's a big part of this dungeon. That generally speaking, you'll be fighting dragon minions much more than living Inquest Asura, and that's why the potion for this dungeon of Inquest slaying isn't necessarily that good, and I've gone with Undead anyway. You'll notice quickly, in that fight, we all just got one shot. It's this animation here. I did show it off before, I believe, in one of the story modes. This V shape of ice coming out in a cone, on a delay, explodes, and does enormous damage. The best way to avoid this is to just move far away from it, or, if you're there early, you can reflect it, instantly killing your opponents. You don't have to fight them here either, for what it's worth, with this line of sight. Using Temporal Curtain, you can just run straight out into the corridor and yank them together. But this was the classic technique. You may have spotted how useless my Elixir S was there also. It didn't really help in any way. If I could redo the dungeon, I probably would be on the Thumper turret instead. Moving further down the corridor, we can see once again another group of Ice Brood. These guys, we are using Temporal Curtain. If you don't kill the wolves particularly quick, they can summon more wolves. These days, that's unlikely to be a mechanic you'll see. Spire also has that shield above her, and on the top right you'll see her health bars being represented. That's because this is actually an escort mission right now. She moves reasonably quick, but when you find yourself running the dungeon lots, it might be a good idea to give her super speed or quickness. At the end of the corridor is your first boss, this champion Ice Brood Wolf. This guy does a ton of damage on a leap ability. If you send one player forward or have a Mesmer create a clone next to it, you can bait the attack in a safe area with a single dodge. Then the rest of the team can engage and try to kill it before its cooldown comes back up. Applying chill to this boss is a really good way of making sure his giant one-shot doesn't come back up before he dies. If you played in such a way that you skipped all the prior enemies in the dungeon, fighting that wolf can be kind of scary, as all the other stuff starts piling up on you during the encounter. Though that can also be advantageous, as you reflect the Ice Elemental's cones onto the wolf.
Attention!
Keep moving. I don't want to be buried here.
We get some nice horror elements there. I'm pretty sure my screen was supposed to shake. Maybe the new option to disable other players' camera shake is messing with this a bit. But yeah, a creepy sound and alarm that Subject Alpha has escaped. An explosion and roar in the distance, hinting at our main recurring enemy the whole way through this dungeon. Here you'll see Spires walking. Again, if I equipped Elixir U and tossed it at her feet to give her super speed, she'd get to this panel and allow us to vote all the quicker. I did that on the other paths, but not this first one.
Stand back. Watch me push a button. Ooh, maybe I'll flip a lever.
I love how sarcastic she is about that.
Attention! Security protocols engaged. Lockdown measures are now in effect.
And oh dear, just like in Sorry's Embrace, it's never that easy to beat an explorable dungeon.
Well, there goes my exit plan. Listen, there are 3 contingency plans for escaping this site. We can fight our way to the front door and seal it behind us. I can radio in for a submarine. I know a weak point that'll make a great exit. There's an Inquest teleportation lab. Get me there, and I'll wire up a way out of this funhouse. Decision time. Which one can you handle?
So this is the vote. I like her description of it as a funhouse. You remember in the early Asura stuff, there is an Inquest base called the Funhouse. This sequence could have been a little bit less confusing if we actually got to see our supposed Asura Gate exit get shut down with the security measures, but there is no such thing here. For now, let's make the call to go for the Submarine, Path 1.
Submarine, huh? Someone likes the smell of engine grease.
The idea for the 3 separate paths to be different escape plans, and each quite interesting, a Sub, a teleporter, or just the door, I really do enjoy. Spire follows up by saying security is powering back on, so be on your toes. Long story short, imagine the world's biggest trap, and now you're standing in it. That's this place, and it's gonna do everything to kill us. Then let's find a way out. That claustrophobic idea of trying to escape from deep underground in this lab is brilliant.
Attention! Quarantine in effect.
I do wonder if they could have taken a more Twilight Arbor approach to voting in this dungeon, but we just get the 3 choices at the start, and that's good enough. With that hideous roar, here we can see Subject Alpha in this utterly devastated room, fighting a handful of living, remaining Inquest. The animations he's using on them during this time, we can take advantage of to see how he fights. His abilities are very specific, and many of them are designed to one-shot glassy players. So if you're going to play this on a high damage build, you have to learn to dodge them. First is this Dragon's Tooth. When getting hit, even on quite tanky gear, you'll see Brack takes a ton of damage. On the bottom left of the screen, for most of these dungeon runs, I've had my combat log playing. This allows you to see the name of the enemy skills that have been hitting us, and is a bit of fun extra flavor. Well, for this skill, you'll see, it's called the Teeth of Primordus. You might wonder why that is. Subject Alpha himself is clearly an undead enemy, and that's why our potions of undead slaying are so useful, being that we'll fight this boss a lot of times. But the reason that the Tooth of Primordus is there is because much like the undead giant at the end of story mode, this Subject Alpha is a creation of the Inquest blending Elder Dragon magics together. And it means, as we go through the various dungeon paths, Subject Alpha will be tapping into all the Elder Dragons. His combat skills change based on which plan of Agent Spires we choose. For this one, he has Primordus abilities, and you want to dodge the dragon's teeth in their red ring circles after a few seconds as much as possible. That's not his only skill though. He has ice abilities for Jormag, he has crystal abilities for Kralkatorrik, though not all of them are being shown on this path. By the end of the video, we will have seen them all. The other animation you should really pay attention to right now is this earthy looking one, with these 3 spikes that cascade out, getting bigger and bigger the further away from Subject Alpha you are. Well, it's a cool skill, definitely. But hold on, this is where really attentive players could find something out. If all of Subject Alpha's skills are based on the Elder Dragons, why does he have an Earth one? There isn't an Earth Elder Dragon. Just what's this skill named in the combat log anyway? Well, much like the Teeth of Primordus, you'll see this is called the Teeth of Mordremoth? What on earth is Mordremoth? In no point in the open world have we heard this word, and no point in any of the lore articles and blog posts have we heard this word, and no point in the personal story have we heard this word. In none of the novels that were released anyway have we heard this word. But here, sneakily and unceremoniously, there it appears. Very few of us caught this in 2012, but it has always been here in the game, and as I was discussing at the front of this video, it has serious implications for the story coming up later. A beautifully well-hidden hint that only that slim subsection of the player base, who were deeply enthusiastic about both lore and the hardcore endgame content, would ever have come across. There's still a lot to discuss about this strange word, Mordremoth, but I'll leave that for some later videos. For now, just think about this, think about the missing novel and what it might have had to say, and think about the mysterious and now maybe not accidental inclusion of Zone Green above.
That's the second ugliest thing I've ever seen.
With Subject Alpha seemingly defeated, you'll notice we never put him to 0 health. He instead ran away. We get to move on. I do love this room for what it's worth. We didn't get to come here in story mode. The point of interest in here is known as the Shattered Containment Pod, so I guess he was concealed here, just where the last time we were walking through. Spire says this isn't the time to talk. The submarine won't keep waiting forever, so let's move on. We're going to go to a really beautiful place now, past these ice-brewed quaggan in containment chambers that, fortunately, don't fight us, into the aquarium, it says in quotes. We got a brief glimpse of this area in story. The Crucible of Eternity is next to and partially submerged under that lake in Mount Maelstrom, and here we get to walk out underneath it. This place is so gorgeous. There's no actual content, it's just a road you run along. I wonder whether they had an idea originally where those quaggan would chase you and you had to find your way through, but players know their way through this sequence now. It's not even really much of a maze, you just walk forward and take a left. For this video, I wanted to go the leisurely route and really give you guys a good glimpse at all these beautiful places around us. COE has some amazing rooms, and this is one of my favorite in all of Dungeons. It's strange to realize that if we were to break out of the map and head into that water, we wouldn't actually be participating in underwater content, but walking around on the seabed. It's just faked to look like water there, because the engine can't truly handle underwater passageways and tunnels, just yet at least. Maybe one day.
Attention! Lethal defense measures online.
Our next task is to shut down the laser defense system. Initially, it's being guarded by a selection of assault and defense golems. They have a nasty laser pin down ability you did see in story, so it's a good idea to line of sight them on this corner, get some reflects up perhaps if you're ready. There are multiple different areas you can use, but our team here is doing very well at pulling things together and blowing them up. I didn't even really have to heal them much in this one, and it was over in seconds. And now, a fun jumping puzzle sequence.
Don't worry, it's just basic security measures.
I love the way she describes these as basic security measures when it looks as intimidating as all hell. This is actually very threatening for Bract, who might be defeated if he touches just the slightest portion of any of these lasers. The idea is to get at least 3 players to run down this corridor so they can hit switches on the other side. But to do it, you have to jump over these horizontal beams while being entrapped in this cage. You'll see it opens for me here, and you're on a time pressure to do it quickly. I hadn't done this for a very long time when recording this video and was genuinely scared I might screw up. It can be challenging if you're out of practice. But there, that's how it's done. And what I need to do now is wait for my teammates to arrive and hit some of these other panels. The way that the developers want you to do this is to stay within the cage. But if you look at my party members, they're hiding against one of the walls. That actually allows you to ignore the vertical lasers moving up and down the room and take it entirely at your own pace, if you do it properly. I took the moment to look at the very center of the Crucible here, which neither in story nor explorable actually is a component of any of the content. The other fun thing about this is if you're sneaky, you actually only need 2 players to make it. By standing between these 2 control panels at once, I can actually activate them together. There's a coordination window to press the buttons all at the same time, and then we're through.
Attention! Security measures online.
Did they pay her by the word?
Spire there remarking how often the tannoy system is going on. I like it in COE. It feels like we're playing some of the more modern content where there's a lot of voice acting. With the lasers disabled, we can come up these ramps to the next boss.
Attention! The cafeteria is now closed.
Being interrupted as we go to hear about the cafeteria. A place mentioned, but that we don't actually get to visit. I find this encounter kind of interesting with respect to Honor of the Waves earlier. In Honor of the Waves, we saw one of the final bosses of the path used a mechanic with totems giving it boons. Well, here in the next dungeon along, that maybe the developers were angling to be a bit harder, a mini-boss that you always have to fight in the middle of the paths is using that same mechanic. The 4 turrets around give this boss protection, regeneration, retaliation, and also, additionally this time, there's a turret that cleanses its conditions. The boss itself, as a golem, does obviously do different things to what we saw the Butcher doing in Honor of the Waves. Most notable are the laser beams and elementalist-style static fields that stun you if you try to walk through their circumference, so try to stay close together and not get yourself stunned too frequently. With careful positioning, you can be sure to always cleave the boss and one of the turrets. I usually go for either protection or retail, but as you'll notice, they're a lot closer than the Honor of the Waves encounter, which makes it generally a lot quicker to get through. It's only here that the Crucible of Eternity actually splits on paths. Everything you've seen so far, you have to do no matter which of Spire's plans you pick, and we'll be skipping to this point every time for the rest of the video now. COE is very good, but it's also true, it reuses a lot of content.
Attention! Intruders detected. Security golems now activated.
Back into the room that is extremely difficult to solo in story mode, we actually have a similar mechanic again too. We need to activate the panel in the center of the room, which you'll notice says security layers bypassed 0 of 5. Activating the panel though takes a really long time. You can't fight back while doing it, and all of these mini golems flooding the room will attempt to walk over to you and detonate, blowing you away and doing lots of damage. The golems do die extremely easily. Even as a healer, I'm able to take them out. So the best way to beat this is to dedicate some players to killing golems while other players activate the panel. Here I'll show you what activating the panel looks like with just one player on our team doing so. That leaves me unable to fight, and that's fine, I'm the healer and there's no healing needing to be done, while everybody else kills the golems before they can blow up. With that, we're successfully through one security layer of 5. Bypassing a security layer triggers some actually much more threatening golems that you need to take the time to clear out. I think there'll be about 3 or 4 at this point, before it's back to just being the mini explosive golems. The mini explosive golems, by the way, look a lot more threatening than they actually are, because even once they die, the red rings indicating where their explosion would have been had they survived doesn't actually dissipate. That's an aspect of telegraphing ArenaNet has got a lot better at handling in the intervening years, but since dungeons don't get many updates, this one still feels a little bit wonky. So, we could do this sequence 5 more times in a row. It would take a long time, one player opening a security layer, killing the golems, then again. Or we can do it this way. Have 4 members of the team all activating the panel all at once to spike through the next 4 layers of security while just one person defends us. This technique is very widely used and I thoroughly recommend. It saves you a lot of time. Just make sure the one guy defending you has a lot of AoE cleave damage. For this attempt, we used a Guardian using the new spirit weapons we talked about in Cordicus's Manor. Having burst through 4 layers of security all at once though, means we're going to have 4 waves of dangerous golems attacking us all together.
Help me. Don't let the enemy see me bleed.
They just killed Spire over there. Most teams, at this point, would just run to the far side of the room and be done with it. But for us, we wanted to show you killing everything. This is a perfectly good line of sight spot that all the golems will trundle a nice happy road into our massive damage and healing. This was one of the moments in the dungeon where I really felt the power of my build. Being able to drop the super elixirs and as much Condi cleanse transfer as possible was great. Every time they're burning us, I'm flipping it into Aegis and we just start blocking everything. Fantastic stuff. I'll note that my elite skill could have been different for this dungeon. The supply crate is pretty damn good also. Not just for the healing turret it drops, but the tool belt skill, cleansing conditions and dropping med packs for people, is also really valuable. Instead, I've gone with the mortar kit so that I can drop blind fields, something very good for dungeons especially. The next room is going to do something brilliant, and one of the reasons I'll cite COE as possibly the best implemented dungeon.
Attention! Biological anomaly detected.
Don't let them get through!
So this is the Thormogolemic Observation Creche.
Look who got caught in their own trap.
And the cold-hearted Spire finds it funny that some other, rarely seen at this point, remaining living Asura Inquest are trapped inside that force field. We get the opportunity to vote. No, this doesn't change the dungeon's path, it's just purely for the added flavor and fun. So, it's a moral dilemma. What's the plan? Help these inquests, or let them be someone's lunch? For this video, I told the team to all vote with their hearts, not revealing their intentions beforehand after a countdown. And you'll see, I said to save the inquest, but they all wanted to let them die. So having lost the vote, I have to live with that.
Stay back! It's gonna blow!
No! No! No!
gruesome. And it's exactly this kind of extra flavor going beyond what we expect from dungeons that makes it feel like this is such a good one. And it's very much in line with those D&D comparisons we heard in the earlier interview. Selecting this choice actually does let us skip a fight, so it's the one most players would do in the end. You might argue the devs shouldn't have implemented it that way, so it was always a coin toss which players would pick. But even for the first playthrough, I think it's a really fun thing to experience, and I wish all the dungeons had taken the time to implement lots of extra, less meaningful votes. Subject Alpha's return here now sees the inclusion of a new skill, the large Kraukatoric crystal he'll use to stun and isolate one of our teammates. I'll talk more about that later as I get hit with it myself in upcoming paths. The other thing that's changed is now we can get a lot more damage on him before he disappears. He leaves at 25% this time. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to point out that he resummoned those Inquest as risen thralls, tapping into his Zaitan magic. We even have these bone tendrils around. Spire's dialogue's updated here. She says, "You did the right thing. They were rogue elements. This mission's tantamount. Everything else is expendable." And we say they did need our help though, and we left them to die. She says they got what's coming to them. Now, make sure we don't end up like them. And we move on. If that's not typical Order of Whispers, I don't know what is. In this next dungeon chest, I get really lucky. You'll see I get a charged lodestone. This is a side of dungeons I haven't talked about yet. Basically, for every single one of those chests in each dungeon, you have a chance to get either a core or a lodestone associated with the various elements.
Attention! Anyone failing to locate to a safe zone risks dismemberment, death, immolation, electrocution, demotion, and more.
Lodestones are really rare, high-end crafting materials you could also be farming from elementals in ore. I talked about that in the main story series. They're used in the crafting of legendaries and a lot of other Mystic Forge recipes. Of all the lodestones, it's the charged ones that ended up most expensive and ended up in the most recipes throughout the game. So it was always very profitable to play Crucible of Eternity, just in case you got one. And here on footage, that's exactly what happened. Should you be making a fiery themed legendary, however, you'd probably want Destroyer or Molten Lodestones, coming from other dungeons, COF and Sorrow's Embrace. I've always liked the way that the developers paired specific materials to specific dungeons, and it was only Ara that really missed out on this, because the Ara materials were so common from all the other undead in the rest of the game, people didn't care much. Personally, I think Ara should have been a mix of all the lodestones, but we're probably getting a bit off track. This next boss, Bjarl the Rampager, is an Ice Brood, and you could equip a specific weapon just to take him out if you like. His in-game model is actually a very rare one, that for many years, this was the only place you would see an Ice Brood that looked like this, but that eventually changed. His mechanic is that he has this frozen armor, making him almost invulnerable. He can be killed by conditions, which do tick damage on him, but run out very quickly. In fact, my very first time ever fighting him, I tried to kill him in just that way, and it took hours. The actual mechanic is he has a charge ability with his greatsword that can be quite fiddly to see, but he will launch across the room if you can bait him to charge into one of these electric pylons surrounding him. It will strip his defensive armor, the Scales of Jormag, and make him vulnerable again. So here you'll see, he's invulnerable, we get him to charge this pylon, he stuns himself, that's not reliant on break bars for what it's worth, and we can do damage again. The trickiest thing can be getting him to trigger the animation the first time. After that, it's pretty smooth. A fun thing really good groups can try to do is deny him renewing his armor altogether. It's actually a skill he has to cast to get the Scales of Jormag back. So, if you watch very closely, you can maybe interrupt him in the middle of that animation, though it's extremely short and very difficult to do, especially in the game as it now stands with break bars. It really was more viable with the old Defiance mechanic. You can also then use Chill to increase the amount of time that he's vulnerable, though most players wouldn't appreciate that, and the thing is designed that he sheds all conditions off himself very quickly, even the non-damaging ones, which I think is a shame. Here you'll see I very specifically managed to strip the scales off again, and all that's left is to beat him up. The room's pretty cool. I like how in CoE, it's not just generic Asura labby stuff all the time, but you actually go through a lot of the different elements. That beautiful water room earlier. Here's a nice one. Probably needed to keep things fresh.
We're almost there.
After Bjarl, there's nothing much left except a very short walk to the final Alpha engagement. Spire's dialogue's updated to say this would be the perfect vocation spot for bored Whispers agents. Imagine pitting your wits against lab-brewed monsters in a quiet getaway spot. Ah, well, a girl can dream. I'm afraid she'll have to speak for herself on that one. I've never been on a skiing holiday, and I can't quite get the appeal of going to a frozen, cold, damp room like this for leisure. Maybe some of the other areas of the lab, sure.
Attention! Remain calm. Failure to remain calm is the sign of a weak mind.
So this is the final boss room, the Golem Gate Delivery Dock, and it's home to one of the more obscure points of interest in the game. It's something only available before defeating the boss, and that'll become clear in just a second as we walk through this. One last roar as we get a front row seat to Alpha's essence, these tar elementals merging again.
Get it before it gets away again.
And Spire wants us to kill it for once and for all. That won't actually be possible. It's designed so that when you defeat him as a final boss, one of those tar elementals is always invulnerable and manages to slink away. The whole idea of the dungeon is to lock it down and not let anything escape, but a part of Subject Alpha always will. A sinister suggestion that maybe he'll appear in some later expansion stories, a prospect I spent many years looking forward to. One last new mechanic this time, as these green blobs fly through the air, becoming more Alpha's essence. The creatures will attempt to reunite with him, and if they make it, they'll heal him a lot. So either crowd control them away, kill them early, or at least keep poison on the boss so that the healing isn't too strong, and you'll be able to grind through.
Get it before it gets away again.
Watch closely how we the players can kill many of these essence in the area, but one will sprint off with swiftness to the back and out through some crack into the lake.
The sub's coming. Or if you'd like, you could treat yourself to a very long swim. I should have remembered. There's nothing easy about an inquest base. It'll be fitting if the sharks inherit this place after we flood it. All right, get ready. We're all going for a boat ride.
Depending on which path of escape you choose, changes the ultimate fate of the dungeon, whether it's left depowered or in this path, totally flooded.
Get to the submarine, hurry!
Let's talk about that obscure point of interest. It's for the SS Cuttlefish, the submarine that just burst into that wall. However, you have to get really close over to that wall for it to trigger. I guess because the devs didn't want you accidentally getting the point of interest before Subject Alpha was dead and being confused, since at that point, the wall isn't destroyed. You'd think to yourself, SS Cuttlefish? What the hell? I'm just standing near a random wall, there's nothing to see. The problem is that once the submarine is there, and it's obvious that SS Cuttlefish is around, the physical hitbox, the collision on the submarine itself, prevents you getting close enough. And you basically can't get the point of interest to trigger. This means the only way to get this point of interest is to walk right against that wall for apparently no reason before the boss dies, possibly while being attacked. Then it will trigger. After killing the boss, the sub will then appear and you can leave the dungeon. Weird stuff, but still not as difficult to get as the pump relay room in Sorrow's Embrace or the much more famous Dragon's Roost in Ara. This terminal has some fun stuff for us. The monthly talent show has been cancelled due to I hope you are all happy. Zord. Zord is not a character we've met anywhere else in the game. I wonder whether the devs will actually add, or is possible we just let him die at some point in this dungeon, or will let him die when we flood it in a second. This window gives you a glimpse into some of the other paths, and what we would have faced going for the front door. And Spire closes out, saying, ugh, engine grease, not the smell I would have chosen to follow the odour of rotting abominations. We say, can anything follow us out? She says only one section will be exposed to the outside world, and this shark should have it covered. The lockdown sealed the rest of the facility down tight. Don't worry, we'll keep an eye on it. Now what? If I had my way, I'd pilot this thing to a nice little tavern I know in Lion's Arch and drink the place dry, but this is the PAX toy, and I have to return it. So, no rest for Spire, who mentioned that Lion's Arch tavern twice in this path, and will again in some later ones. We can walk on over, press F, and head into Mount Maelstrom. Here's a beautiful extra detail COE also does the other dungeons never went anywhere near. Look at this, guys. When we load back into Mount Maelstrom, we are not at the Asura Gate. We're at the Submarine dock. Back when we played this in story, I did mention that a special interaction could happen here. Not only did we appear next to the dock in an immersive way, this Lightbringer, Genevieve, has new dialogue for us to update the fact we just beat that path. She says, hey, I've been meaning to ask you, what's it like riding the submarine? And we say, like, fathoming the unfathomable. She says, oh, delving the undevable depths, eh? Haha, they tell me your mission with Agent Spire was successful. Well done. You're a credit to the Order. I wish I could ride in the sub. And we say, you've never been in it? They say, nah, I just got it. They don't let me take rides. I keep volunteering for the odd shifts, though, hoping one day they'll need an extra hand on a rescue mission. So look at this. Such layered dialogue we also only get from being a member of the Order of Whispers. You just don't find this kind of work being put in when it comes to the other dungeons. What tip-off players would have to speak to this agent at this point, I'm not entirely sure. I bet most players miss it because by the time they're running through the explorable dungeons, they're not in that mode of exploration and pressing F on NPCs, assuming they might have already spoken to that character before, but they would miss out, and I'm really happy to show it off from this video. Moving back in, let's choose plan 2 now, to utilize the teleporter and escape that way.
Stand back. Watch me push a button. Ooh, maybe I'll flip a lever. All right, let's hope that lab is still operational.
A new path means Subject Alpha's core abilities have changed. I guess the devs knew they would be reusing this boss a lot, so they at least made it feel different each path. He's quite deadly on this one. So here you'll see I'm standing on an icy patch, and I'm surrounded by 2 red rings. The telegraphing is actually quite poor here and deceiving, but at this point in development, the devs didn't have a better method of doing it. What you're actually looking at right now is a donut. That central area where I'm stood is actually largely safe. The eye of the storm and the damaging stuff is in the ring around us. As you can see here, when I execute a dodge roll, I don't even get an evade frame. Nothing would have happened. And the same with my ally on this animation. There is a little bit more complication to this. The ice does shatter and do a bit of damage, but it's something you can mitigate with a single packet of Aegis from a Guardian, and a lot of this, you can just stand still and blow up Subject Alpha, especially while running a support, as you can see our team is.
That's the second ugliest thing I've ever seen.
Spire gets a brief change in dialogue here as well, if you take the time to actually speak to her. She says, no time to talk, we need to get to the teleporter, otherwise we're trapped here forever. After the water room and the lasers, and upon the defeat of the Mark TB this time, you'll see Spire opens a different doorway. Both Path 2 and 3 will take us this way now, where we head further up through the facility. The next sequence is something of a time gate, but nothing compared to what we experience in Ascalon Catacombs or the Citadel of Flames, though because it appears in both Path 2 and 3 for this dungeon, it can be a little bit frustrating to deal with anyway. We need to get through this door.
I need to blow open this door.
So Spire builds a cannon for us to defend.
I've got the perfect tool for this situation.
The defense involves defeating a mix of small golems that will explode, similar to the sequence we saw with the security layers in Path 1, but also, occasionally, some bigger, elite golems that will spawn around where I'm stood. It's always a good idea when these 2 bigger golems spawn to pull them together with a temporal curtain or use some kind of launch or blowout. Thankfully, on my build, with a personal battering ram and a rifle, I have lots of ways to manipulate enemy positions and make sure we get that cleave damage. This is a weird room in that the next wave of elite golems will only spawn after a set period of time has passed after the last wave is dead. And it means that if you can kill really, really, really quick, you're actually going to see more elites spawn than any other group. You can get 3 or even maybe 4 waves in, where weaker teams might only see 1 or 2. I always used to like the idea of getting to see the maximum number of golems in here, just to keep myself engaged in what is otherwise quite a slow and plodding encounter. Just leave one person near the cannon to cleave out the golemites. Everyone else can do whatever they want to kill the elites. With the encounter completed, all the golems will cease to be hostile, and the cannon will blow open the door.
We need to get up one more floor.
Another section here that most teams would stealth and skip through. In fact, it was quite important to stealth through here because you'll notice a lot of Risen. I guess the idea is these came from Subject Alpha, but they're really deadly, particularly because this is a champion abomination. Abominations we know very clearly from the rest of the game. The more they hit, the more they build rage, and the more rage they have, the faster and heavier their attacks come. He's got very wide cones on his strikes. That means quite often he'll build it very quickly, and players just wouldn't like the risk of trying to kill him. If he snowballs against you, it could, in the past, mean a very quick wipe. He's also accompanied by these two other Risen, Defilers. These are actually some of the most dangerous high-tier Risen you find in the game, a variety that we'll be talking a lot about in the final dungeon, Ra, in the next videos. You're going to see us quite handily deal with this abomination, still letting him build a lot of rage, but I can't express enough to you guys how scared people used to be of this thing. And in fact, as soon as that laser blows up the door, most teams would be very strict about standing close together near something like a thief to stealth past the whole sequence as they're rapidly patrolling towards where the laser originally fired. And if you didn't do it quick, you could be caught behind him. Nonetheless, that's how we kill him in 2019. And we can move up to even more undead now that also groups would usually skip. I definitely can't recommend skipping these guys in 2019. They're just too fast to kill, and look at all the loot we get from them. You'll notice not only are there a ton of small thralls, all giving loot and experience, but there are these larger elite plague carrier abominations. Their explosions will do a lot of damage if you don't dodge or blind them, but create even more enemies you can loot, the grubs. I would often hear stories over the years of players getting precursors drop here. Because don't forget, at this point we're at level 80, so we're qualifying with every kill for the chance at an exotic weapon at level 80, and if that happens, it's got a chance to become a precursor. I personally never was so lucky, but it's something I always think about climbing up. At the top of the staircase are a more dangerous selection of Risen that are actually very rare. Even in Ra, you don't find this specific variety that frequently. That's a story for another day. Just watch out for the guy spinning with his axe, and the wraiths can do a lot of lifesteal. The quicker you focus them before they can heal themselves, the better. That takes us handily into the next Subject Alpha fight for Path 2. If you just skipped all of those enemies, you might try to climb the walls of these rooms to escape from them before spawning the boss, but we're going to run straight on through this apparently open door.
Attention! Quarantine in effect.
Ambush!
Knowing where he'll spawn, we could stand together and blast might or get our offensive boons ready, if our comp was so inclined and we had those tools available to us. But fighting him in general shouldn't be very different to our other attempts. You may still again notice some of those Krakatorik crystals. Don't worry, I haven't forgot it. We'll be hit with one soon enough. Don't forget the chest on this one. It spawns back where we came from.
By Cormir, what were they thinking when they did this?
The dungeon gets pretty interesting again in this next sequence. We've seen a water area, we've seen a frozen area. We're now going to see another thing apparently Earth-related. It's a room filled with volatile blossoms that are a lot like the ones we saw in Twilight Arbor. This was actually a location we walked through in story mode, but now these blossoms have appeared, I guess, as the lab has fallen to chaos. Then beyond, look, there are nightmare hounds and husks. Well, that stuff's associated with the Sylvari. But aside from Sylvari test subjects that might have been captured here, it's probably really hard to understand right now why there might be Sylvari influence in this dungeon. It's an Elder Dragon research facility, right? Again, the players were left scratching their heads. The hounds act exactly the same as the ones in Twilight Arbor, even if now they are a higher level, and the same with the husks too. Skipping these, again, was something people would commonly go for, but I want to note as we clear this room out, that if you look back up at the prisoner cells, we explored them back in story. For some reason, the developers have spawned these blossoms, even all the way up on those ramps. Did they expect players to once come up here as a part of this sequence? I honestly don't know. It'd be pretty fun saving more prisoners here, but that happened in this exact room in story, and maybe it was on that basis that they decided it would be a bad idea. There's also something quite cool and dynamic going on with the mechanics right now. If we had chosen Path 3, the game wouldn't have spawned these volatile blossoms, but instead there would have been a different environment effect. But more on that in just a moment. Our job is to walk through this open door into this green room we caught a glimpse of right at the start of story, and feels pretty good to finally be able to visit. I always love that moment in games, seeing something that appears very close, but you only actually get to much later in the adventure. Well, here we are. The boss is an evolved husk. He's legendary and simply described as hearty. There's a lot of mechanics at play here. First, if we try to use projectiles on him, they'll get reflected back at us, doing massive vulnerability and poison. I'm actually hurting myself with this. It only happens on occasion, when the boss summons this briarthorn patch around him. While that patch is there, it's basically acting as a reflect bubble. You can kind of think of him as a bit like a guardian that periodically is able to reflect. But the thing to note is even while he's not reflecting, the guy's pretty much invulnerable, so we have to do something else. Also in the room are these razorthorn patches that you can actually damage and break. The boss will occasionally resummon and heal them with another one of his skills, so as a healer, I'm struggling to break them in time, but other players could do in just a couple of auto attacks. Lastly, there's the Inquest influence, a series of, once again, these small, volatile golems that spend their whole time walking over to you, sitting down, and then trying to explode in a one-shot that will kill just about anyone straight away. Put them into downstate, I mean. So the way we kill the evolved husk, as you might be able to guess, is to take these smaller golems and have them blow up on him. You can do that with any kind of launch or blowout you like, but the game provides its own tool, these subversion rifles. They have two abilities, a rifle butt that does a bit of damage and is a knockback, and they also have a laser beam skill. You can channel it on a golem, which will mean the golem just walks toward the husk instead of anything else. There are some weird complications with this though. First of all, what you just saw there, that the razorthorn patches will be respawned and mess the golems up, even instantly killing them. So the game is to use the rifles to move the golems and then occasionally drop the rifles to damage the patches again. Some classes have damage on their utility skills that can bypass having to drop the rifle altogether, but not too many. Another wonky thing about this is how early you connect the laser beam. Here you'll see I'm letting the golem walk on its own out into the room for quite a distance before I finally use my laser beam skill and tell it to walk into the husk. That's because the laser beam only casts for a certain duration of time, and if you use it too early, the laser beam will run out before the golem gets all the way into the middle. It will change its mind and come charging at you. From that point, it's really hard to get them to do what you want. You'll also notice I'm being periodically attacked by these earth spikes. That's the last ability the boss uses, and he tends to pick on just one player to continue spamming that on. Each time you get one of the golems in, you do about 5% damage to the husk's health. But interestingly, you might notice the laser beams not only force the golems to run where you want them to, they also give the golems might. This is a really rare situation where you can give your enemies positive boons. The devs nearly always avoid that. But I think the intended idea here is that your entire party can use your subversion rifle on the same golem all at once. And that means that golem will have lots of might right when it strikes the husk and do a lot more damage than if you all split up around the room, which is the preferred strategy you can see our parties doing, and I nearly always do when tackling this dungeon. That idea of giving might to an enemy as well is kind of fun for the rest of this dungeon. You can actually keep one of these rifles to give subject alpha might in the final fight and troll your friends if you're so inclined. It does make him a little bit more dangerous. Here you'll see I'm using a mix of the laser and my personal battering ram and the rifle 4 to try and knock the golems in. Not all classes have this much access to blowouts, and in fact, if I was on a berserker build and doing more damage, the initial impact of my rifle 4 would likely critically hit and instantly kill the golem, thus not allowing me to move him. So I'm thankful for the exact build I'm playing right now. Even the rifle butt skill, which everyone gets while holding a subversion rifle, has that problem, so don't rely on it too much. Here's the last golem that I mistimed a bit, but I can knock into the husk.
Find the teleportation lab.
And we're done with the mysterious green room filled with husks in a Dragon Lab research facility. Even Spires noticed how weird this is, saying, interesting, I'll take off sample of that back to the order. Maybe they can figure out what that was. This is the only typo I've seen in Siri, so I'll forgive it. The final boss is right next to this room. There's no long corridor or winding passages, just a door, and then the final boss. Though you can get a little glimpse of some of the Path 3 stuff, involving, yeah, that's right, destroyers, we'll look at in just a moment. I'm picking up the subversion rifle here because someone in the team remarked they didn't know whether it was a regular rifle skin players can use elsewhere in the game. Normally this kind of stuff, it would be, but I don't know in this case. It just reminds me of Mass Effect. So, this is the teleporter room, and one more Subject Alpha fight.
Attention! All exits are now sealed.
Here you'll notice, after this quick jump animation that I could have dodged, Subject Alpha has encased me in this imprisonment crystal. It functions like the ice block mechanic I spoke so much about in Honor of the Waves, but lasts a really long time. Basically, I'll be eliminated and removed from the fight until my allies break the crystal and free me. It's a really fun concept that the devs don't play with much, and maybe because of a bug. Here you'll see, I was targeted by the crystal again. Subject Alpha tends to pick just one person and completely spam it on them as the course goes along. But the bug is that if your teammates break you out of it too quickly, you'll end up stun-locked for a really long time, even though the crystal isn't there anymore, and it can be very annoying, especially if you represent most of your team's damage or chances at survivability because they're relying on your support an awful lot. The answer, if the devs couldn't fix the bug over all these years, I think, should have been to make the crystals tankier. That has the other upside of making it a more interesting and prominent mechanic elsewhere too, as they're usually instantly cleaved out, but there never was such an update.
Get it before it gets away again.
Path 2 ends the same as 1, with Alpha splitting into lots of different essence, and one sneaky one running away invulnerable and with swiftness.
Attention! All exits are now
I'll note that to get the dungeon reward, it's not actually enough to just kill Alpha. You do have to take out his essence to get your chest.
Last stop. Your tour of this nightmare factory is now over. Teleporter up. Everyone through. If I don't get another chance, I just want to... you know what I mean. Job well done. Let's go.
Remember Spire's quite cute disposition there, in that she doesn't know how to show us gratitude. She'll act very differently in Path 3, and I honestly can't find a reason for why, but I'll get to that on that cutscene in a sec. We can of course leave the dungeon by clicking the Exit Instance User Interface button above our minimap right now, but believe me, that's not what you want to do. Here Spire has some dialogue. She says teleporters almost make daring escapes from death too easy. We say, what do you mean? She says, where's the thrill from jumping into a magical hole? Where's the fiery escape? Where's the mad scramble to avoid being trapped forever? We say, what happens now? She says, my advice? Forget this ever happened. In fact, if anyone ever asks about what happened here, say you heard it was an accident and walk away. She gets kind of creepy here. We say, and if I don't? She says, one day you'll drink something that doesn't taste right, or you'll feel a pinprick on the back of your neck, and then, well, I don't need to spell it out for you. Are you threatening me? Just the opposite. I respect you for your help back there. You know Whisper's agents don't give warnings often. Take heed of this one. She's threatening to assassinate the commander of the Pact and a fellow Lightbringer, outranking her. What if someone follows us through the teleporter, we say? She says, not a chance. I wired explosives. We go through, it goes off. Simple as that. Explosives? Is that safe? She says, it's either that or someone stays behind to turn it off, and I doubt you're volunteering. And neither am I. Yeah, we get a pretty sinister side of her here. I mean, we've had a few, I guess, as the dungeon's gone along. I wonder what Real or any of the others would make of this. In any case, we can say goodbye, and again, instead of exiting through the conventional method that most dungeon runners would, instead, let's walk up this staircase and take a second to look up and appreciate how cool this room looks. It's very similar to some of the pre-release concept art the devs showed on a reel at GDC that defined the Asura aesthetic. Coming up, we get the POI Gate Kino Decker 5. Also, I suppose, quite a rare point of interest. And is that a reference to something? Why do I feel like I recognize it? As we move in, we hit the Mount Maelstrom loading screen. And look, we're in the sky, falling from really high up, thankfully, into the water, so we're not defeated. The teleporter will randomly place you out here in Mount Maelstrom. Look at the world map. All my other members of the party ended up dotted all over the waters here. And if you look very closely at the footage as I was falling, you can see them in the distance doing the same. I've always loved the idea of hanging out here in Mount Maelstrom, just watching across the waters with no idea about the dungeon, only to see a bunch of players falling from the sky. Wouldn't that be incredible? It's a shame we never got to catch that while using the jump pad here also during the main storyline. So many people don't know about this stuff. I think the teleport exit might even be slightly better than the submarine one, though in that one, of course, we do get some bonus dialogue. With all of that done, we just have path 3 to complete now. That's going to involve dealing with the whole meta, but once we're actually in the dungeon, it's going to be the exact same route as nearly all of Path 2. A huge amount of asset reuse until finally, after the second alpha battle, things will change. So let's see how that all looks.
Front door. I like your style. Let's go.
We've now seen all of Alpha's mechanics, but on this path, it'll be a different combination he's using. I believe he won't use the Teeth of Primordus, but instead Jormag and Morgemoth together. I've always been most comfortable fighting this version of him.
By Cormir, what were they thinking when they did this?
For this path's generic dialogue, Spire says let's get to the front door, then we'll talk. You'll notice, unlike in Path 1 where she frequently updated, this time is just the once. COF was similar, with more detail on P1 than the later ones. I wonder if it was a single dev that went through the game, first filling out all the Path 1s, then the P2s and 3s, and by the time they got to P2 and 3, they were a lot more bored with it, or a lot more time crunched. This time, after fighting Alpha, you'll see there aren't volatile blossoms or Mordrum wolves. Instead, it's a different door that's open, and these small lava fields that have spawned instead. That's the mechanic I was hinting at earlier. And once again, look, it takes us all the way up to these cells, even though there's no reason to go up there.
Oh, look. Freaks.
Through the door, you'll be able to kill these Destroyer Crablings. Destroyer Crablings do a lot of damage, but are squishy, and much like the waves of Risen Thralls earlier, they can drop a lot of loot. These guys, in fact, can drop Destroyer Lodestones, and I always like doing Path 3 COE just because of the extra chance of getting good drops on this path rather than the others. I don't know why Agent Spire calls them freaks. I'm guessing when that dialogue was written, they didn't know it would be used in a room in front of destroyers. Instead, probably they anticipated it would be Inquest. But it's only a guess. This panel says, warning, core network corruption in progress. Data system integrity compromised. Black envelope protocol is in effect. Black envelope to me sounds like it might be referencing something in the real world.
There has to be another way around.
It's certainly not something I recognize from elsewhere in Guild Wars lore, but it's the only thing in the dungeon remotely resembling the data retrieval task we were given outside. What we just saw was a bunch of destroyers bursting out of this wall and doing a lot of damage. Again, this would be a sequence people would stealth and simply walk past, but we're choosing to fight and put ourselves in a bit of danger. Particularly, this next group is very threatening. It's Destroyer Crabs again, sure, but one of them is now a champion and drops lava fonts that do obscene damage. I would genuinely, on a ranking of top 10 most deadly dungeon bosses, put this guy near the very top, along with the Nightmare Court Knight over in Twilight Arbor and a few others. Thankfully, we have pretty high damage, break his break bar as regularly as possible, and he doesn't get the animation off on us too frequently, but avoiding the lava fonts is an absolute must that is made a little bit more tricky by the smaller, lesser environmental lava fonts that are constantly spawning in this flaming corridor anyway. If you are a good enough group to kill them, and let's face it, most groups these days will be, it's probably worth fighting, because look, you can get another champion box, and I even got a straight up Destroyer Lodestone from that guy, that most people would still be skipping.
To be honest, I never liked Inquest Labs. They always smell like pain and cruelty.
Spire may not like this area, but I adore it. This flaming corridor reminds me of the watery corridor we walked through earlier. What a fantastic idea to do one of lava and one of water. Just another reason that COE is a joy to travel through. And the area name is cool too. Psycho-Arcanic Monitoring? Wow. This is Lab Red, the location of the last boss before our final subject, Alpha. This guy used to be something of a benchmark. A lot of early days YouTubers would throw videos up of how quickly they could kill him, and he's got some fun mechanics. First, to get to him, you have to climb along these red holographic platforms that have dragon's teeth landing on them periodically that the boss is summoning. They do a lot of damage and blowout that can put you in the lava, possibly instantly spelling your death. Even worse, once you get to the boss, you'll realize this flame shield around him is protecting him, and you'll be thrown away from him. I end up in the drink here, but can wade my way to safety just because I have a lot of healing power on me. Other Glacier characters could possibly die. So he's invulnerable. Climbing back up this staircase, there are two, one on the east and one on the west. You might then be tempted to use projectiles. My mortar has incredible range, but I'm being reflected, and they're coming back as fireballs that, in theory, could do a bit more damage. It's curious to me that the evolved husk from the other path does a ton of damage and conditions with his reflect defensive mechanic, but this guy does basically none. So what do? There are these cryo lasers in the area, but before I talk about those, I want to point out that one of our 5 players will be aggroed on the boss right now, and they're constantly having dragon's teeth summoned on them. This player, it's best, just stands away from the rest and waits to do the jumping puzzle to get to the boss while everybody else activates the laser. It's not actually required, it just makes things a bit smoother. So what we're going to do is spread out around the room, one player on each of the 3 lasers, and we're going to count down 3, 2, 1 and press F to activate them. It's not actually required you burst them in sync like this, but it's the best way through. The power of all 3 lasers together will bring down the shields, and you can go attack the boss. The guy that had aggro with the dragon's teeth constantly being summoned can activate a laser. They just have to get the timing right, and you should probably let them be the one that dictates the window for everyone else to press F on first. Otherwise, they'll get interrupted, and you can spend time faffing around on this that you really don't have to. Back in the day, you'd maybe have to do this 2 or 3 times to kill the destroyer. With the kind of damage people can unload now, you can kill them in a single burn window, and we're through with the fight. That's what the old YouTube videos used to be. People being impressed that, wow, you can kill the evolved destroyer in just a single phase? That's incredible. And now, you'd expect very little less. You'll notice there as well, maybe, that the animation for the fire shield does come back long before it actually kicks you out, so the game's quite forgiving about when you should leave. Obviously, if you are doing low damage, be sure to escape as soon as possible, because you don't want to all get thrown in the lava and then wipe. Though the boss's health never resets, and you can pretty much graveyard rush that one.
We're almost there.
With that, Spire's right. We're back to where Story originally took us, these long, sweeping platforms. In Story, this is where we met Ritlock and co. There wasn't really anything to fight. Sadly, in Explorable, there's not either. I think this would have been a cool sequence to have a ton of Inquest waiting at the exit, anticipating our escape, and attempting to thwart us at the last moment. But the devs were more forgiving about that. I guess they didn't want the path to get too long, and instead, we walk right to the gate to see, one last time, Subject Alpha.
Back!
I'm gonna miss Spire claiming it's back over and over again. While fighting this version of Alpha, it can be a good idea to pull him back down this staircase and against a wall. That means when the Alpha's essence comes spilling off of him that threatens to heal him, it will all land right near his feet and the incredible AoE damage your team is doing, and you'll kill them before any healing can really happen. If you fight him on an open field, as you can see we are, quite often they will be able to get back in and pulse his health back up. Poison can help, as I said, but one final important note about Alpha is he very regularly cleanses all of his conditions off of him. Not many bosses do that, and it's kind of unfairly punishing to the condition damage playstyle that already isn't particularly favoured. So overall, it's often smarter to fight him against a wall and cleave the essence down. Lastly, for this version of Alpha, try not to fight him right next to the portal, because once he dies, the Asura Gate will turn on, and it can cause you to instantly leave the dungeon before your loot chest triggers, and you'll be screwed out of getting any currency. This is a pretty long path, all things considered, and that's going to be frustrating as all hell to experience.
Get it before it gets away again.
This version of the Alpha fight, I actually get to specifically target the last essence. Here he is, with perma-swiftness and invulnerability, as he creeps off, escaping the lab, despite our attempts to shut it down.
Nothing like outrunning a freak of science to get your blood pumping. You head through the door, I'll seal this little nightmare factory. If I don't see you on the other side, you have my thanks. For everything. Charges primed. Let's move.
So there you have it. In one path, we just teleport out and shut it down. In another, we flood some of it. In this one, Spire will talk a little bit more now about the fate of those who might still be inside, with her usual dark undertones. Not a bad day at the office, if you ask me. Too bad it'll all be classified. It'd make for a great tavern story. So, is the lab closed for good? What's to stop people from getting in? Or things getting out? She says the code I use will seal every door and potential access point. It also turns off all life support and power. That lab is now a cold, dark tomb. Interesting she speaks as though we've already exited. We say, wait, what if someone's trapped? She says the only things left inside are inquest and then monsters. I won't lose sleep over either dying slowly in there. Think about that being an inquest trapped with the monsters forever. Why is the operation classified? We staged this to look like an accident. Other inquests will show up to investigate. When they fail to get into the lab, we'll track them back to their bases. And you'll end up mapping the entire inquest network in return. Clever. Of course. How do you think we located this base in the first place, she says. Wait, so what's next for you? If I was just in the Order of Whispers, a week's vacation in Lion's Arch. But since I'm a team player with the Pact now, it'll be paperwork that'll never get read anyway. She's so cynical about that. And so then we can go back to the other decisions there. I really like this idea that there's going to be a lot of momentum against the Inquest. You remember when we beat this on story mode, there was a suggestion we were going to take the Inquest out for good. But as I mentioned in the story video, that really doesn't manifest. For this one, there is no special exit or animation or dialogue, but I think that's to be expected. After all, that is the 2 linked gates that was demonstrated in story mode, and it makes sense we would come out right here, potentially ready to defend the meta if it was about to fall. And that's the Crucible of Eternity. It was a lot of fun, and despite a lot of path reuse that some of the other dungeons definitely did better, I hope I've demonstrated why I think it's such a high quality dungeon. They hit pretty much all the bars of the paths being roughly the same length and roughly the same quality, though P1 is admittedly just a bit shorter. For loot, we've got the sigil of mad scientists. Again, that word freaks springs to mind. That's against Inquest and not very good for the dungeon. You got the offering and gift of knowledge, Inquest gear, which Bract was using for a while earlier, and then the more interesting armor tab here. Inquest slaying, Golomancer runes, which actually had a reasonable buff in 2018 and I really enjoy, and also were bugged once upon a time to do tons of damage. The Sinister Autonomatonic, and then the extended potion of Inquest slaying recipe. Now that Sinister Autonomatonic, you may recognize as the name of a tonic from Guild Wars 1, and even just from the way it's written, you'd think it'd turn you into a golem, like the Guild Wars 1 did. But no, it turns you into an Asura, a member of the Inquest. This isn't an Automata tonic. What are ArenaNet doing? In fact, this isn't the first time a dungeon tonic's been pretty broken and poorly implemented. Just look at the Ghosts of Ascalon ones right at the start that don't even turn you into ghosts. No idea how that slipped through the cracks, and I don't know if they'll ever fix it. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll be back tomorrow for the final dungeon. That's Ara. And unlike all the others, which have just 3 paths, Ara has 3 paths and then a 4th one that is super long and super special. It's in Ara that will get a lot of incredible and important lore for the future of the game. We already had a bit of a snippet here as an Easter egg in COE from looking at the combat log, but Ara goes a lot further than that. Remember Ogden Stonehealer and how he didn't have much to do in the game? Well, I'll see you in Ara Explorable for some payoffs on that. Thanks very much, guys. I'll see you next time.